Hello, I am Tanya Andrews, the Marketing Director for Pennant Publications, and we are here today with the amazing Emmanuel Kulu Jr., who has written a phenomenal book. It's called I, Black Pharaoh. First of all, Emmanuel, I just want to make sure that you're aware that we are recording this and that you are okay with that.
Yes, I am.
Okay, I want to give a little bit of a history of Pennant Publications real quick. It is owned by Pastor Ray and Debbie Stanton, and they live in Indiana. They are authors themselves, and they were looking for publishers to publish their own books that they had written, and they couldn't really find what they were looking for, so they started their own company. Thank God, because I'm one of their authors myself. So I appreciate that they stepped out there and started their own company for people who just want a good publisher, and Debbie is very considerate and very helpful. Emmanuel, I think that you would agree with that.
Absolutely. She is. She's amazing.
She is amazing. I'm the marketing director. As I stated, I've been the marketing director for 2 years, and I help authors with book signings and advertising and all those sorts of things. So we have with us Emmanuel Kulu Jr., as I mentioned. Emmanuel, how about you kind of give us a little bit of history about yourself? There's a lot of history in your book. Please tell us your history and story and how it plays into I, Black Pharaoh.
Absolutely. Yes, I grew up, my father is an African man from Cameroon, and my mother is from Chicago. She was affiliated with Black activist movements such as the Black Panthers in the 70s and the 60s and 70s as she was coming up. So she was one of those real strong Black women, and she converted to Christianity as she got older and began to speak the word about the Bible and loved all people. My father, after his marriage with my mom, he went on to a second marriage after they divorced, and he married a Italian woman, which brought diversity to our family. So we had a lot of diversity. We had to face some opposition to that, having a mixed family, so to speak. But then as I went to school, I was always challenged with my African ancestry, and not just from people other than my race, but some people of my race as well felt that they were different than Africans. So I found myself always educating on African history, one way or the other, defending it and putting it out there. And as I grew more of a passion for it, and I wanted to solidify African history to the world.
Okay. Very interesting. That would be a little bit diverse with the African history and then throwing the Italian in there too. That would be very interesting.
Absolutely.
I bet you had some good Italian dishes though.
Oh yes. Oh yes. My stepmom can cook.
Yeah, I bet so.
Yes. Lasagna, spaghetti, all that good stuff.
Sounds amazing. Your tagline coming out with this book has been, "We must restore the truth." What truth is that? What truth, and why are you so passionate about that truth?
Well, when you go to places like Egypt and you look on the walls, you can see that these were African people. Throughout history of American history, the Western culture has particularly depicted these ancient Egyptian people as something other than African, whether it would be European or Middle Eastern. But this clearly isn't how the ancient Egyptians depicted themselves, because most of them look either reddish, brown, or even black, very dark skinned black. So, and the common people of Egypt who live in the Aswan area really look like other Africans. So I sought to bring that truth to the light, the true imagery of ancient Egypt, and putting this book out really sheds light on the miseducation of African history and how African history has been tarnished. So I wanted to help correct that.
Okay. Very interesting thought, because, you know, growing up and looking in history books, you're correct. They do not have the black tint to their skin. They do look more European. So I was very interested to read about it and learn. Your book seems to be a bit on the controversial side, which you have
Hmm.
handled with amazing ease. I love how calm and cool and collected you are through everything that I've seen you do.
Hmm.
When you began posting your book cover, did you face opposition of any kind, and what was the response to that cover?
Yes, and speaking of that, I have the book here, right here.
Awesome.
And when I did post this cover, just so the camera can see there, when
Uh-huh.
I did post this cover, I did get a lot of flack because they've never seen this before.
Uh-huh.
And this was kind of new. And there's been a lot of battling going on since the 70s with a great historian named Sheka Inti Diop and the Egyptologists about the African origins of ancient Egypt. And a lot of these historians that came up and started to bring this to the forefront, they were quickly labeled Afrocentrics. Usually, what an Afrocentric is considered to be is someone who's extremely African, who could be kind of rude, say things like Africans are better than everyone, things like that. And people, kind of labeled me that at first. And I
Oh.
had to show, hey, I come from a very diverse background, and I love all cultures.
Uh-huh.
But history is history. What the Romans did, the Romans did. What the Greeks did, the Greeks did. What the Persians did, the Persians did. What the Egyptians did is what they did.
Mm-hmm.
And it's okay for us to accept that Africans built this great Egyptian dynasty, which we all marvel about when we see the pyramids and the astrology, the mysticism, all the things that came with Egypt, the architecture, all of those things, the fashion. I mean, we can go on and on about Egyptian history that people were so fascinated by, but there has been a lot of resistance on my side. I got a lot of hate mail.
Oh my.
People really felt that I was blackwashing ancient Egypt when I was just restoring the truth, as you mentioned earlier. And that became my tagline, my slogan, that this is truth. We all originate from Africa, every human being on this earth. And I felt if we can get to that common place as seeing Africa as a beautiful place in the Western world, then we can accept the truth, the real truth.
Okay. All right. And it is a very interesting tagline because and it's very bold. A
Hmm.
very bold statement that you want to restore the truth, and it draws people in to want to know what that truth is that you're talking about.
Yes.
What did you enjoy most about writing this book?
What I enjoyed most was being the first one to do it in a non-fictional style, a historical fiction style. So I was very excited about doing it like that, painting this great story of Queen Hatshepsut and Tutmosis III. And a lot of people hear about Nefertiti or they hear about Cleopatra, but you don't hear about Hatshepsut very much. This was a woman, an African woman who ruled the entire world for 20 years. And when I say the world, this was a woman, this was the world power at the time, ancient Egypt was. So this was the place that everyone in the known world came to get resources, to just see the beauty of Egypt. It was just the most, the world power at the time. And this woman ruled the entire, pretty much the world for 20 years. And Hatshepsut, I found her to be very interesting because she was the longest reigning woman in Egypt to have absolute power. So I wanted to include her. Tutmosis III, he's called the Napoleon of ancient Egypt because he conquered a lot of the Levant, a lot of the Middle East, as well as some African nations below Egypt. He also conquered into Nubia. So I wanted to tell this twofold story, so to speak, of a great African king and a great African queen and combine them into one
Okay. And so being an author myself, that's really interesting to me. So it took quite a bit of probably research
book.
of
Hmm.
history to learn. I mean, you probably know a lot of the culture, but the culture of that time, to
Hmm.
be able to piece in those parts to make it more realistic. So
Right.
I probably that was a little bit enjoyable too, that all of the research that you did to find those
Absolutely.
details.
Just like to find the food, the fashion, all
Yes.
of those things, what they believed, what God did they believe in, things
Uh-huh.
like that. We had to when we researched this, we had to really tap into, and I say we, 'cause we have a team here for
Oh,
Pharaoh Universe. We had to really research all of those things to make sure we're writing the facts. Now, I'm a Bible believer as well. So what I did, which is different from a lot of Egyptologists, particularly, I use Bible dates that correlate with the Bible. And I wanted to line up the Exodus time frame with my story, because I feel that the Bible is the most accurate history book.
yes, sir.
So I think Egyptology has a lot of questions with timelines, and I didn't want to go by that. So I used a Bible chronology, so to speak.
Very cool. I'm also a pastor, so I appreciate that a lot.
Good, that's good.
Looking back on the writing of the book, was there anything that stood out to you or anything that caught your attention that might not have before?
Absolutely. The Bible connections with actual history. A lot of people, Egyptologists particularly, they started their base of study when it comes to ancient Egypt. They started it based off biblical studies. And then they started to go away from that. They started to say, okay, we don't want to use it based off biblical studies. And they stopped using the Bible as a basis to prove it. But as I was doing my research, particularly in writing my book, it is so many connections that you're going to find in this book that has to do with the scriptures. And that's good because Egypt is mentioned in many different time frames. You're talking about in Moses's time, all the way down to Jesus's time, Egypt is mentioned.
Yes,
So that's a very powerful thing to know that a lot of the biblical studies even started right there in Egypt.
very cool. You stated that you feel that there's a miseducation of African history. How do you feel that plays into the events of today?
Well, the miseducation of African history, the events going on with the protesting, the tearing down of some of these old statues of Confederate uh, leaders of whatnot, military leaders, things like that. Now, African history, when you look at Black history today, it's limited to 1 month in February. But I think Black history could be extended all the way throughout the entire year. I don't think it should just be a 1 month thing, um, due to the things like ancient Egypt, ancient Nubia, Zululand, Carthage, ancient Ethiopia, the Exumite kingdom. There are so many kingdoms that attribute to African American people and Africans who live in the United States. It's truly done a disservice. Now, when we're talking about education, we hear about Egypt very, very briefly in our education curriculum, and we don't see it as African at all. And that's part of the miseducation. And also, the education of Black history is always connected to slavery and not connected to ancient African history, which was a golden age. So to speak, when we're talking about the dark ages of Europe, happened to be the golden ages of Africa, which was pretty much before the Roman and Greek power. So those are things that need to be taught in history. Nile Valley civilization, what it meant to the world, how the Greeks and the Romans, they went into Egypt and they learned a lot of things that are still in the world today. If we turn around the dollar bill, we see a pyramid there.
Mm-hmm.
We see a pyramid on the back of the dollar bill. So we can tell that the structure of the United States was formed based off some things in ancient Egypt and in other cultures as well. So to exclude that from education has been a problem, I would say, that leads to that miseducation. Now, this events that are happening today. You're seeing a lot of African Americans who are completely disconnected from Africa. They have no clue about Africa at all.
Mm-hmm.
To even kind of call them African Americans is kind of tough because they've never been to Africa. As far as they know about Black American culture. So that's also the miseducation. So they need to know about their homeland, and that is very crucial to us going forward in this whole big protest mayhem that's going on right now. Having a sense of pride in your culture. I think every culture deserves that. Every culture deserves to look at their heritage and say, wow, we did this, we ate this. We mentioned about my stepmother and her Italian history. She's never been to Italy, but she can cook any Italian dish.
Yeah.
So that shows you that she knew her history very well. And this is a lot of Italians, and as well as Chinese who were born in America, Irish who were born in America. They still have their traditions. And this is what's lacking because of the miseducation of African people and African Americans.
Okay. So the controversial side of it, when you are saying we must restore the truth, you are not doing it to be just to be controversial. You're
No.
doing it just because you want the truth known about the history of African Americans.
Yes.
Just so that the culture is known, not
Mhm.
so that it can be riots and all
No, no, no,
mayhem.
no,
That's not at all what it's about.
no, no. And when I say we, I mean we as a human society. I'm not saying Emmanuel Kulu, must restore the truth. I mean,
Right,
I'm going to
right.
be a part of it, but I say we as a human society must learn to embrace Africa as the beginning of civilization. This is Professor Leakey taught this, a long time ago, that the first human skull was found in Eritrea in Africa. So that shows us that we all have common interests in Africa. And if we can get to that point to where we're saying, wow, all of our history began in Africa, let's stop saying Africa's one big jungle and people who live there have monkeys and lions in their backyard and, poverty. And let's stop publicizing that. Let's publicize the beauty of Africa. So,
The truth.
yes, the truth, restoring
Yeah.
the truth.
Okay. And then what advances or gains in culture do you hope are achieved from I, Black Pharaoh?
Well, I hope people look at the book and read it for what it is, and don't look at it biasly because there's a Black African on the front cover. I hope that they read and enjoy it. It's a great story. It's an adventurous story. There's some heartbreak in there. There's some triumph in there. There is love in there. There is spirituality in there. There is biblical in this book. I mean, you have a lot of combinations. You have conquering, you have war in there. You have so many different things that happened in those ancient days that we can relate to today. We're just looking at it now from an African perspective, which is very fair, I believe, because these people were African people. So I hope culturally that people can look beyond um, what's been processed by the process in their head by the Western world through
Mm-hmm.
television and other novels before mine, that they could just open up their minds and see Egypt in a different light.
Okay. And I thinking about my childhood and what I learned, in my school years, you are correct. If I think of Egypt, I think of the pyramids and wonder how they did that and back in
Hmm.
those days and I've never connected African people with Egypt with the
Hmm.
Egyptians. So
Right.
it's very interesting to look at and to see, and I would hope that it would be approached with an open mind. um,
Hmm.
we we really do need to know our ancestors and where we came from. I'm German. I'm a German
Hmm.
Kansas farm girl, you know. But it is interesting to think about those things because from a Christian perspective, as a pastor, God did everything he did for a very specific reason. He
Hmm.
is the master of details. And
Hmm.
so we do need to look at all of those details and all of those things to see what make us all who we are today for
Right.
that greater purpose of sharing
Hmm.
God's love.
Right.
How does all
And
of that play into sharing God's love if we don't even know our ancestry and where we came from?
right. And it's interesting that you say that. When you look at world powers, they've always painted their gods or angels as themselves or some sort of celestial beings.
Hmm.
Egyptians painted these gods black and sometimes the complexion of brown and red that they were. So it's no different with you when the Europeans or the Romans or Greeks came to power. They painted gods like themselves, you know. But now in America, we're entering into a very diverse, multicultural society. And as our knowledge is increasing, the Bible talks about the light getting brighter and knowledge will be increased. And now that we're such a multicultural society here in America, it's very good to say, hey, these Egyptian people were African people, these Roman people were, Europeans, these Persians were Middle Eastern, or Babylonians were Middle Eastern as well. So we know that everyone has had a significant part of the human story. And I think that's very key to us coming together and uniting with this whole situation going on with protests and injustice and miseducation. When people look at you and they see nothing but slavery, then it's hard for them to give you any type of value to even to your life when we're talking about the situation with George Floyd. But when you look at an African person and say, wow, the Mali kingdom, the Zulu kingdom, the Egyptian kingdom of Kemet and the Kushite kingdom, and you marvel, you tend to have more respect for that person. But if you're looking at a person that's historyless, you kind of look at them as less value. They don't know who they are. They're ignorant. They're doing this. They're doing that. And that has led to what we call in this world white supremacy.
Okay. Okay, so will there be a second Black Pharaoh novel? Is there another
Yes.
novel coming?
Yes, we are currently putting together the gold edition of I, Black Pharaoh, which will be an extension of I, Black Pharaoh, the first one. We're probably going to release it sometime in 2021. It's going to have some illustrations. We want to put about 20 illustrations just to give people the imagery, because our goal also is to turn this into a film or a TV series down the road. Children's book is in the works.
Oh, cool.
We really would like to turn this into like a Star Wars series of different African nations, not just Egypt. We want to start with Egypt because Egypt is the most popular one. But we want to just show those beauty of those other African cultures as well. So that's going to be our thing.
Okay, I'm excited to see what's coming next and what all you guys have in store for restoring the truth.
Yes. Thank you.
Can you show your book again, please?
Yes.
This is I, Black Pharaoh by Emmanuel Kulu Jr. It can be purchased at www.penitpublications.com or also on Amazon. It is available in paperback and hardback. Emmanuel, I thank you for joining me today. I appreciate you taking the time. This has been a very interesting interview.
Thank you for having me.
Do you have anything else to add?
No, I don't. Thank you. Oh, just make sure you guys go to www.iblackpharaoh.com. You can check out my background. You can check out the book. The link to Penit Publications is on there as well to purchase the book. Any questions, inquiries, you can check me out there at iblackpharaoh.com.
All right. Wonderful. Thank you, sir. I appreciate the time.
All right. Thank you.